What's up, everybody? Marvel Cross 316 back with another comic book flashback. Today we are looking at Amazing Spider-Man issue number 95. This issue came out in April of 1971, and today we see Spider-Man fighting in London. Huh? Well, we'll find all this out and figure out why Spider-Man is in London. And I guess you can probably guess why he's in London. We found out that Gwen Stacy had moved to England after the death of her father. And so we see here that there's a big possibility that now Peter Parker is going to go to London to find Gwen Stacy. And so I'll go ahead and say that's exactly what he's doing. And so today's title is Trap for a Terrorist. So not only is Peter Parker coming to London to find Gwen, but Spider-Man is going to also have to fight terrorists in this issue. And so that'll be pretty cool. We're going to find all this out and figure out exactly what's going on. So let's go ahead and continue with this story. This issue is brought to you by Stan Lee, who wrote this story. We have the art by John Romita Sr., and then the inking by Sal Buscema, and then also lettering by Artie Simek. And so let's go ahead now and get started with today's issue. We see that Spider-Man is continuing to think about Gwen Stacy. No matter where he goes, Gwen is on his mind. And it just bothers Spider-Man so much. We see this Pride's perfume on sale everywhere. And then when Spider-Man looks at this billboard, he sees Gwen's face instead of the woman. And he says it's just wherever he goes, he sees her face. And he even says every pleasant sound reminds me of her voice. I mean, he just cannot get Gwen out of his mind at all. And then he says, I've got to put an end to it somehow before I go mad. And there's only one way. I have to go to London. And so there we go. He said, I have to find her. There must be a way for me to explain. Luckily, I have no classes this week, but what do I do for money? And so we see here that Spider-Man is going to swing by the Daily Bugle, and then Spider-Man changes back to Peter Parker. We see that Peter Parker is about to go to Jameson's office when all of a sudden he's going to be stopped by Joe Robertson here. And he says, hey Pete, I haven't seen you since Captain Stacy died. Peter says, I guess I've been pretty shook up about it, Mr. Robertson. And he said, oh, we all have. And he said, is his daughter doing okay? And then he said, well, she left for London, England. And basically, Peter's like, there's just no way I can ever go. I can't visit her. And Joe Robertson is actually going to be a good Samaritan here, and he's basically going to say, hey, I can get you a plane ride to England if you promise to bring back some news pics to me. So go ahead, go to the travel voucher, just tell her that, I'm going to allow you to go, and you go on ahead and make the trip to England. And so that's what's going to happen. Peter Parker is just ecstatic at this point. See Jameson comes up, he said, what, isn't that Peter Parker? What's he looking so happy about? He said, and then basically Joe Robertson's like, oh, I just gave him a new assignment, JJ. And then we see JJ say, lazy, good-for-nothing teenager. He only works when he feels like it. And so we see here that Peter Parker is going to rush all the way to Aunt May's house. And when he gets there, we notice that Mary Jane Watson is there. We see that her aunt is actually forming this costume for her. We know that Mary Jane is big into acting and also singing and just Broadway pretty much. So she's at their house right now. We see that Peter Parker relays the news to Aunt May, and then he rushes out of the house. Just wanted to let Aunt May know if she's wondering where he's at. And we see here that even Aunt May's like, to think my own nephew actually in love. And we see that Mary Jane's like, it doesn't take any special talent. And so we see that Harry Osborn, who is basically Peter Parker's roommate, is going to drive Peter Parker to the airport. We see here that Harry Osborn basically wishes Peter Parker all the luck to find Gwen. And he basically says, take your time because I get the fridge to myself. And so we see that Peter Parker, he gets on the flight to London. He's all, hooked up, basically has the seatbelt on. He thinks about his promise to Gwen's dad. We recall back in issue number 90 that Gwen's dad basically said to look after her. There's no one else to look after her, and basically she loves you so very much. Be good to her. And so we see here that Peter Parker's thinking about that promise, but then he's alerted here by this little boy saying, "Hey, you have your seatbelt on and everybody else doesn't. Why do you still have your seatbelt on?" He said, "Oh, thanks for reminding me." And these two, basically, this guy right here, he is a big government guy from America, and he's coming to London here. And these two characters here are going to play a big role in the rest of this issue, as you'll soon find out. His name is Herbert Knowles, and this is his son. And so we see that as the plane is now going to land in London, all of a sudden over the speakerphone, there's an alert that everyone needs to stay in their seats. And basically, we see that the plane is being taken hostage by terrorists. And these London terrorists here basically are threatening to blow up the entire plane if they don't get these what they want, basically. And so we see here that everybody's starting to panic. Peter Parker's like, great, this is just what I need right now. So he puts on his Spider-Man costume with all the confusion taking place, breaks a hole in the plane, and then is crawling underneath the plane. We see the terrorist notices this, and then he's basically going to remove the bomb away from the plane. So that's exactly what he does. He kicks the bomb. It explodes away from the plane, saving the passengers. The passengers get off the plane, and then we see here that during all the confusion, the terrorists were able to grab a hold of Knowles and his son, and they're getting away in that car. So now Spider-Man is going to have to go after that green car. So he swings, and they're shooting right at him. And I mean, just crazy stuff. He puts a spider tracer on the hood of the car. We see that one of the guys, one of the terrorists, starts shooting at Spider-Man on top of the hood. Spider-Man kicks the gun out of his hand here. And then we see that there's another entrance as the roof begins to slide open, and then Spider-Man dodges out of the way, getting off the car, and we see that the car is able to get away, but at least Spider-Man was able to place that spider tracer on that green car. And so when he gets to his feet, we see that the London police come, and basically this guy's name is Inspector Hargraves, and he's basically impressed to see Spider-Man here in England. He's like, "What are you doing here, chap?" But basically, Spider-Man has no time for talk. He has to go after Knowles so that he can save him and his son. So he scales this wall, and we see that the London police are very impressed here by the skills of Spider-Man. So Spider-Man is now basically crisscrossing the city, trying to figure out exactly where his spider tracer at, where that green car is with Knowles, and he's just swinging through the city. And while he's swinging through the city here, he basically swings past this window here, and it just so happens to be the house where Gwen Stacy is staying at, and she says, "A figure swinging past my window. It looks like it is. But it isn't possible. He can't be here. Not here." And then she faints here. See that her Uncle Arthur and also her aunt here, it's like she must have saw or imagined seeing Spider-Man. And so we see that Spider-Man is swinging through the city. He's still trying to figure out where his spider tracer is at. And then he finally comes across the car. And we see here that the terrorists notice Spider-Man. They crash into the side railing here, and Spider-Man's going to then set up his automatic camera so he can get some pictures here of this fight. And so Spider-Man is going to now take down these terrorists here, but upon taking down these terrorists, as we soon see here, we notice here that Knowles and his son are not in the car. And then basically this one terrorist says, "The police know our terms. Unless all our comrades are released from prison, the Americans will die at 7. Nothing can save them. Their fate is sealed by time itself." Now, that's a very important thing we need to understand, by time itself. And Spider-Man won't get that until later on in this issue, as we see that Hargraves arrives on the scene, and basically he's telling Spider-Man, these terrorists do not need to make a mockery of our justice. and you have till 7 o'clock to find Knowles and his son. And so Spider-Man has no time to waste. I mean, time is ticking by really quickly here, and he's trying his best to figure out exactly where these terrorists stashed Knowles and his son. And then he finally realizes, maybe that phrase, by time itself, means something. And said, by golly, that means Big Ben. So he swings all the way to Big Ben. I mean, it's 2 minutes till 7. So he webs up all four faces of Big Ben's clock here. And he notices, yes, this is where the government man and his son are at. And so he's going to then have to save these guys and then try to go back to Big Ben and get that bomb away from Big Ben as well. And so Spider-Man was able to save Knowles and his son here, and they are basically in police custody here. And we see that the police are asking him, why do the people in the States fear Spider-Man so much? And we see here, perhaps too many of us are prophets without honor in our own lands. So now Spider-Man goes back to Big Ben here, and he gets the bomb away. And then as we see Spider-Man changes back to Peter Parker, he notices that in the Daily Times, Spider-Man foils a terrorist plot. And so now all of London knows that Spider-Man has been in London, and now Gwen Stacy knows this as well. And he said, now that all England knows that Spider-Man is here, how could Peter Parker go to visit Gwen? She'd be certain to suspect. He said, even when I win, I lose. And so as basically Arthur is looking at his television, he says, you weren't dreaming, Gwen. You didn't imagine it. Spider-Man is in London. You must have really seen him. And then he said, perhaps you were too quick to condemn him, child. After all, you were under a great strain. What with poor George's death, you may have done him an injustice. And she says, man, if only Peter Parker would come here and just comfort me, but maybe I'm wrong about many things. And then we see here that Peter Parker is slowly going towards the airport. And is he going to go back and find Gwen, or has he given up? We're going to have to figure all this out as we dive into the next issue with issue number 96. But also we have a big return, and that is the return of the Green Goblin. Yes, y'all, it's been quite some time since we've seen the Green Goblin. Issue number 40 to be exact. And so we have a lot to look forward to as we look at issue number 96. I hope to see you there. And until next time, keep reading.